Hi guys, as promised under our constitutional law course and our topic of interpretation, let us now discuss the case District of Columbia versus Heller. In 1976, Washington DC enacted a law that effectively banned the possession of handguns, requiring that all firearms be kept either disassembled or trigger-locked when stored at home. Dick Anthony Heller, a special police officer who was legally authorized to carry a firearm while on duty, applied for a handgun license for self-defense at his home, but his application was denied. Heller challenged the law, arguing that it violated his Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Interpretation: the dissenting opinion. A group of judges led by Justice John Paul Stevens argued that the Second Amendment was intended to protect a collective right related to militia service, not an individual right to personal self-defense. The key points of their dissent were: first, collective right interpretation. The dissent argued that the Second Amendment was intended to protect a collective right tied to militia service, not an individual right to own firearms for personal self-defense. They believed that the right to keep and bear arms should be understood in the context of service in a well-regulated militia, as was common during the time of the amendment's drafting. Second, historical understanding. Justice Stevens and the dissenting justices emphasized historical evidence that suggested the right to bear arms was intended primarily for collective defense rather than personal self-defense. They pointed to historical writings and the context of the time, which they believed supported a narrower militia-based interpretation of the Second Amendment. 3. Public safety concerns. The dissenters also raised concerns about the potential impact of the majority's ruling on public safety. They argued that restricting gun ownership, particularly handguns, was an important measure for reducing crime and protecting citizens in urban areas, and that the court's decision could undermine such efforts. In short, the dissent disagreed with the majority's interpretation of the Second Amendment, believing it should be understood as protecting the right to bear arms in connection with militia service, rather than as an individual right to personal self-defense. The opinion in District of Columbia versus Heller focused on the original meaning of the Second Amendment, which was interpreted as protecting an individual's right to possess firearms rather than linking it solely to service in a militia. Here are some factors of their decision. First, textual analysis. The court examined the language of the Second Amendment, especially the phrase, "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." The court concluded that the people referred to individual citizens, not just those serving in a militia. Second, historical context. The court considered the historical context of the Second Amendment, recognizing that it was adopted to ensure that individuals had the ability to defend themselves and resist tyranny. In other words, the framers of the Constitution Having just fought the Revolutionary War, were particularly focused on ensuring that the new government would not become tyrannical like the British monarchy they had just overthrown. The right to keep and bear arms was seen as essential for individual self defense and as a safeguard against government oppression. The, this right was understood as an individual right, not a collective right tied to militia service. Third, purpose of the amendment. The court also focused on the purpose of the Second Amendment, which it concluded was to safeguard an individual's right to self defense. Therefore, laws that banned handguns or made it impossible for individuals to keep firearms in their home for self defense were found to violate this constitutional right. Ultimately, the court held that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual's right to possess a firearm for lawful purposes, particularly for self defense within the home. Court's reasoning. Justice Antonin Scalia, writing the majority opinion in District of Columbia versus Heller, reasoned that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess firearm for self-defense and other lawful purposes. He argued that the text of the Second Amendment, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, clearly referred to individual rights, not just to militia services. Scalia emphasized the historical context, noting that at the time the amendment was adopted, firearms were commonly used for self-defense, and thus the amendment should be interpreted to protect that right.